And welcome back to the Contrarians. Today we are doing a Patreon voted topic. Let's talk about this band. Everybody gets to pick a band. The guideline says that it's a band that we don't usually bring up on Contrarians, but I don't even care about that. Talk about whatever band you want. And we're just going to go around and hopefully get a wide variety of artists, maybe get exposed to some new music or a new perspective on some old music. And I'm going to start with Alex. Alex, what band do you want to talk about today?
So this is definitely a band that I've not heard talked about on the Contrarians, or unfortunately talked about much at all, ever, even back in the heyday. That is the politically charged heavy metal band Warrior Soul. So Warrior Soul started in '87. Basically, Warrior Soul is and always has been frontman Corey Clark. He was doing a one-man art show called Warrior Soul, which he actually got that name from a George Patton docu-series, and that sort of morphed into. He was a musician before that. He was a drummer in several bands, including Raging Slab, another band that doesn't get enough love. But anyway, his one man project morphed into this band, Warrior Soul, in '87. And within a year, they were signed to a major label, and that was Geffen. Um, so between 1990, when their first album came out, and 2022, they have released 12 studio albums. There are also live albums in there, some solo material. And Corey also, from 2008 to 2012, fronted Trouble. So, a pretty famous band that he took over for a little bit. Um, I consider them the thinking person's metal. So this is not a lot of sex, drugs, rock and roll, Dungeons and Dragons. This is very much Megadeth Peace Sells over and over and over again, though. Their message was very strong. Their very message was very deliberate. They had a punk aesthetic of, say, a Dead Kennedys, who were not afraid to go after certain targets, Reagan being one of them. Uh, they were also very much like Public Enemy, in which they were delivering this news through their music in real time. So in the early '90s, this was the reign of Bush Sr., and they let him have it and kind of put everyone on notice of what they liked and what they didn't like. They were very much anti-government, anti-establishment. Um, they talked a lot about the neglected and the abused and the overlooked and the sort of working class person. Um, they were Rage Against the Machine before Rage Against the Machine. So again, the first album came out in 1990. Rage didn't come out until 1992, and Rage delivered a very strong and severe message in their music. But they were shiny and new, so they sort of took off and stole a lot of thunder of what the groundwork that Warrior Soul had laid. And I always question how many people listen to the message of Rage Against the Machine versus the bombast of Rage Against the Machine. I think a lot of fans just got into the music and slam danced in the mosh pit at the concert and missed out on the message that was being delivered. And that certainly happened with Warrior Soul, because a metal band in 1990 that was politically motivated was not exactly going to be on the top of the Billboard charts. Um, so to back on Corey Clark, I've always liked his message. I think he is a wordsmith, great lyrics, which I'll get into. Also had a great voice. It's hard to describe their music other than it's in the pocket heavy metal. There's no mistaking when you listen to it what sound this is. They kind of had the raw energy of, say, a Guns N' Roses when they were first starting out, but infused with that the dangerous kind of in your face nature of Iggy and the Stooges raw power era. So that's kind of the sound you're getting. There's some subtlety to the music. There was some slower songs. I don't want to say ballads per se, but there was that. There was mid tempo, and there was plenty of in your face music. So this was their debut album, Last Decade, Dead Century, which came out in 1990. And I'm just going to run over the song titles because that kind of gives you an idea of the message. So then they followed that up in '91 with Drugs, God, and the New Republic. Back to back, '92, Salutations from the Ghetto Nation. And then their last album for Geffen was called Chill Pill. and I'll get into that in a minute because that's where they sort of dropped a little bit. But those first three albums I have always loved. They did have some airplay, they did have videos. Again, I always bring this up. To me, it was wrong place, wrong time, and they just didn't captivate or have an audience gravitate towards them. To give you an idea of some of their lyrics, they have a song called Losers, which is an anthem for the misfits. And they say, here's to the losers, to the rejects, all the imperfects, all the brokenhearted, to the starving masses and the lower classes, because I think you're beautiful. That was one of the first singles off of the first album. Might have been the first single, but I think that's one of their best songs. They have a song called Jump for Joy, in which they say, needle boys in the park, rotten cops after dark, politicians underground, no light can be found, all the pimps, all the whores, all demented religious wars. And one other song I want to name check is The Party, in which they say, we steal the courts and tax the poor, get Johnny Lunchbox to fight our wars. And I question, was that written today or was that written back in 1992 when this album actually came out? So that's the message you're getting. So again, if you're in 1990, if you're still into Bad Medicine and Cherry Pie, this ain't that. Unfortunately, never caught an audience. And they put out Chill Pill, like I said, in 93. And this was really, you could tell they were not happy with the label. It sort of sounds forced and let's just get rid of the contract and move on. And they never quite captured anything as good as the first three albums after that. They did do a follow-up, Space Age Playboys, which is good. And then they did, at one point, they put out this Odds and Ends collection of unreleased tracks. This was a Record Store Day release on pretty cool red and blue vinyl. And that has some good tracks as well. But unfortunately, they're a footnote at this point. And I think that's pretty sad. But back to the content. On their debut, they had a 4-minute spoken word piece called 4 More Years. So again, in 1990, what heavy metal band is doing any spoken word, let alone of that nature? And on Drugs, God, and the New Republic, they do a cover of a Joy Division song. And again, what heavy metal band is doing a Joy Division song? So very unique. I have always loved them. I want to quote on the back of this Odds and Ends collection. It says that this contains recordings from the band that fought America, fought the business, but ultimately lost. And that sort of sums them up. But I urge anybody that if that sounds interesting to go back and revisit. I think far too often music passes us by, a band doesn't become popular and we forget about them. And I think that's a shame. In movies, we have cult classics, right? A movie that didn't do well back then and all of a sudden now it has an audience. And I urge people to do that with music. And just because someone wasn't popular then doesn't mean their music should be written off. So again, to sum up sort of the discrepancy between them and what I think are their counterparts in context of or content of their music, Rage Against the Machine still gets almost 10 billion monthly listeners on Spotify, which I find to be a big number for a band that kind of dissolved as well. So 10 million, and Warrior Soul gets 6,500. So please give Warrior Soul some much needed, much later love and attention.
Okay, strong start. I often make the point, man, timing is everything. Sounds like if these guys had come out 2 years later, they could have made an impact. But, when Guns N' Roses was the best-selling band probably worldwide about 1988 to 1990, that's a tough time for a political message and a non-hair band to really take the spotlight.
And they weren't doing, Metallica's Black Album either, right? So it didn't match up with either of those and absolutely got lost.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I may even check that out. All right. Well, we're going to move across to Oliver. Oliver, what band would you like to talk about today?
Okay. I'm a bit nervous because I've got lots of stuff to say about this band because I find them so fascinating. I want to talk about Dark Throne. Most of you guys might know them as this black metal band from Norway, but they have much more to offer, and to me they are absolutely unique. There's in my opinion, no band that's like them. And I don't mean that only in a musical way, but also in a, yeah, let's say philosophical way or aesthetical way, because the band leader Fenris, he puts so much thought into his music, and he's a kind of musicologist in metal, and you know from his lyrics that he's thinking about this stuff every day, every minute, and yeah, you find this in their music. So I will give a short run through their history. They started they have a huge discography, and I love that as well, because I love to dive into deep catalogs and find the different eras and styles and stuff. And they have lots to offer in that regard as well. So they started in 1991, and that was the time when death metal was pretty big, was kind of following thrash metal. 1990, Entombed released their debut album, so Scandinavian death metal was a hot thing, and bands got picked up, and Dark Throne were one of those. So in 1991, we got Soulside Journey, their debut, which is pretty straight classic Swedish death metal. They were pretty successful, not overly so, but they made a strong impact with that one. But after that album, they kind of lost interest in that sound, and that has something to do with the philosophy I talked about, because Fenris champions bands that are unique. He prefers atmosphere and ambience over musical perfection. Loves world building sounds that you get images that give you images and stuff like that. So and of course death metal became kind of a safe sound in the early 90s, was successful. Morris Sound Studios gave them all a very polished sound. So they wanted to do something different, and they came up with these 3 albums in 3 years. The so-called Unholy Trinity of black metal. The first one was A Blaze in the Northern Sky, followed up by Under a Funeral Moon, and of course Transylvanian Hunger. And I remember when that first one, Blaze in the Northern Sky, came out, I was reading a metal magazine every month, and even those guys who were listening to hundreds of records each month couldn't wrap their head around this album, because no one had heard this kind of sound at that time. It was very low-fi recording, very hissy, noisy. I think they recorded it with a tape recorder or something like that. So it was purposeful, fully badly recorded, but it captures in incredible mood and atmosphere, and inspired, of course, hundreds of bands. If you go to Bandcamp and look for lo-fi black metal, you'll find that this sound still has bands that do it to this day. I think that's amazing that some teenagers from Norway invented a sound that left this mark. So they immediately became innovators with their style, and they followed those 3 up with a couple of more pretty much straight black metal records, which are a little bit better produced. So next one was 1995, Panzerfaust. Love that title. And Total Death in 96. By this point, they were a duo. So it was just Fenris, the drummer and lyricist, and Nocturno Culto, who's the guitar player and singer. And around 96, they also played their last live concert. So it's been 30 years this year since they gave their last show. they only do records, and yeah, it lends them a bit of mystery as well. So they are kind of these musical intellectuals, and who only do those studio albums. They did a couple of albums more from 96 to 2001. Ravishing Grimness, another black metal album. Plague Wielder, which has a song called I Void Hanger, which inspired an underground metal label with the name. Hate Them, and Sardonic Wrath. And that ends their black metal phase. Because after that, and we're in the early 2000s now, they do a crust punk album, The Cult is Alive. I see they are all pretty much just black when I show them, and they are pretty much black. So they're going from black metal to crust punk, but they still manage to stay Dark Throne, and that's what makes them unique. So they switch their sound, and we will see that going further. But they keep this core of fat riffs and raw ambience. They have pretty cool lyrics. They are funny, sometimes introspective, sometimes dark. So there's a lot to find as well. And they enter the next phase with an album called FOAD, Fuck Off and Die, which is also a bit crust punky, but they introduce some new wave of British heavy metal, early speed metal influences. So it gets a bit more melodic in here. And Fenris starts to sing as well, and he's doing these kind of theatrical metal voices and stuff. They have a song called Canadian Metal, where they are celebrating all those Canadian heavy metal bands like Sacrifice and Razor. So they are giving you also a bit of metal history in their songs, which I think is absolutely unique and cool. And also they keep philosophizing about metal in their lyrics. So they always have liner notes where they talk about their favorite albums and stuff like that. They have cool photos in their booklets where they're taking pics when they are. Fenris is a hiker. He lives in Norway, so he always goes hiking in the woods. And there are always snapshots in the booklets where he's somewhere in the woods with his metal shirts and stuff like that. So it's who does that? Which metal band would do that? They keep going on in their style. So we have still kind of a black metal vibe, but it gets more melodic. Dark Thrones and Black Flags. I mean, the title is a hint to their influences as well. Circle the Wagons and the Underground Resistance. And now we're around 2013, I think. And they're entering a new phase where they get a bit doomy. So they bring in these heavy riffs. They are influenced by Celtic Frost a lot. So you hear that in their riffs and also in the singing voice. They have a couple more. Arctic Thunder from 2016. Old Star 2019. Eternal Hails. And this cover rubbed a lot of metal fans and black metal fans the wrong way, because it shows the cousin of Fenris ice skating with a Dark Throne back patch. And black metal fans hated that, because black metal fans don't go ice skating. What's that? That's for sissies or something like that. But this is Dark Throne. They don't give a fuck. They will do that. And I love that about them. Pretty interesting side note. between their first and their second album, they started recording a second death metal album, but they ditched the recordings. And that album came out later in 1996 called Goat Lord. And Fenris did vocals retroactively and put them over these demo tracks. So it was a very rough sounding record, semi-official, you could say. But they thought it was too interesting to leave it as this kind of demo. So a couple of years ago, they remastered the instrumental tracks and they released it as an instrumental album, which is pretty cool, I think, to do that. Not polishing it up with new vocal tracks, but saying, hey, we had these instrumental tracks. Let's do the best we can do with them. And so that's the albums. The new one is expected this year, so it would be their 21st album. That's a lot in 30 years, so they've been very productive. Fenris is very outspoken. He has a pretty cool Patreon podcast called Fenris Metal Pact, where he's playing his favorite music and talking about metal, letting you into his mind. And he's a funny guy. He's just rambling on and losing himself talking about metal. I think it's a fascinating band that gets a bit underestimated because they started as this black metal band with the corpse paint, and but to me they are, like I said, absolutely unique, and there's so much more to say about them, but I hope I made my point and inspired you to listen to some Darkthrone.
Okay. I have to admit, that is an area that I have never spent much time. I'm not a big death metal guy, never was. But you have to have a lot of personality to be able to call yourself Fenris and wear face paint or corpse paint.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love the album cover with the guy ice skating, though. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's fantastic.
That's a statement right there. Maybe they could have set it on fire or something. All right. Well, thanks, Albert. That was a good one. We're going to go to Jeff Carter. Jeff, what band do you want to talk about today?
Thanks. Well, when I first saw the call out, I thought, the Grateful Dead don't seem to get a whole lot of traction on the Contrarians, but then I thought about it. Martin has championed Donna Jean's singing, and in his History in 5 Songs, he actually makes a case for France being one of the top 5 songs ever written. And so I thought, well, maybe I would do a subcategory of the Dead and take a look at the work of Bob Weir. And this was all before his passing. So the kind of motivation behind, looking at the material kind of changed a little bit since he's passed just a couple weeks ago. So I want to say something about 2 bands that he was a part of, primarily Rat Dog and Bobby and the Midnights. And Rat Dog's kind of interesting, at least for me. I had seen the Dead in 1990 at Deer Creek, and so that was the time that I saw Bob backing, Jerry and everyone. But then they kind of fell off my concert list. I didn't really know any other Deadheads. It was a one-off that I went to, and went to the Further Festival after Jerry died, and then caught, when I moved back to Michigan in 2008, Rat Dog was opening for the Allman Brothers. And at that time, Rat Dog had Jay Lane on drums and Jeff Chimenti on keyboards. And over on the Allman Brothers side was O'Teal. And O'Teal and Jeff and Jay would become part of what Dead and Company became. And so it was kind of interesting to see that kind of nascent, no one was there at Pine Knob to see Bob Weir. Everyone was still pretty much out in the lot drinking. Everyone was waiting for the Allman Brothers with, Derek Trucks and all of that. But I kind of kept up with Bobby, after that, because I was like, well, I regretted not seeing more Dead shows. And I thought, well, actually, Bob's who I'm going to have opportunities to see. So I started to do the back catalog, his work with Kingfish. This was an interesting album produced by the Grateful Dead record company at the time. So Bob Weir and Dan Healy producing this album. And then he did some self-produced ones like Heaven Help a Fool. But I wanted to point to some live concerts because on those tracks, it's Mike Baird on drums. But who would become part of Bobby and the Midnights was, of all people from Mahavishnu Orchestra, is Billy Cobham. And you don't expect a jazz fusion drummer of that caliber to be making music with Bob Weir. And in particular, I wanted to point to in kind of memory of Bobby, if people are unfamiliar with his solo work, on YouTube, there's a 1981 Capitol Theater concert, has Billy Cobham on the kit. It has Alphonso Johnson on bass, who is just a superb bass player. And then on lead is Eddie Cochran's nephew, Bobby. Of course, Eddie Cochran goes back to Paul McCartney and the Quarrymen and, Rockabilly Hall of Fame. But his nephew can play quite well. And in particular, I wanted to point to the song Bombs Away and Easy to Slip. But the Bombs Away track in particular, to see Billy back there absolutely having a blast on drums. I'm kind of new to the Mahavishnu Orchestra, the whole catalog. And the more I get into that and the more I appreciate what he can do, it's also just fun to see him connected to this side project. And he must have been having fun because in 1984, after they did the Better, the Better album is the premiere album, Bobby and the Midnights, the premiere album. This has the track Too Many Losers. This is the kind of pop hit that never made it to the radio, but probably one of the better tracks, 80s style rock for sure. Josephine is also really good. But Billy Cobham allowed himself to suffer, I suppose, a little bit of the indignity, but also I think as I look at this video now, I wish the world were more in line of, and it's not, but they did the first track on here. It's I Want to Live in America. And to see how much fun they had in terms of what that video is about, I think it almost needs a kind of reevaluation. There's a certain romanticism. It's certainly 80s schlock in a way, but there's something really endearing about a world where that song could be produced and it not be, ironic and arch. There's a sincerity to it. And I actually, at first when I saw it, I thought, wow, this is so cheesy. But now I'm kind of, I really like the track, I Want to Live in America. So check that out. Again, the video's cheesy, but there's a kind of romantic quality to it. I don't hold anything against them for that. And then kind of moving ahead, just chronological. The next one here that I wanted to point to, and it's the best album of the bunch. It's Rat Dog Evening Moods, and I think in the comment section to a Contrarian episode, or I don't know exactly where, but I think it's connected to this channel. Someone said, "Hey, you got to check this out," and Lucky Enough, Odessa. But the song that really, out of all the side project, material that Bob has, To Gin is a song that I think is an absolute masterpiece, and I loved it off this album, and I was shocked to find after reading, this is Dennis McNally's book, The Last Great Dream: How Bohemians Became Hippies and Created the 60s. He goes through all of these moments of the 60s. He's trying to do a comprehensive history. Of course, he was the publicist for the Grateful Dead. So it's an ambitious history. And at the very end, the last song that he points to is the song To Gin from this album. And he's talking about actualizing dreams. And anyway, I was surprised, as much as I had invested in the song, to find it as a kind of ultimate tagline to what McNally was trying to say about the 60s generation. So this is one that I can recommend out of any of the projects that Bob did. I think this album really holds up. So I really enjoy it. And then just, in passing, he did do a project called Blue Mountain. This is much more folky. None of the guys that like Jeff and Jay Lane are a part of this, but this has lots of great tracks, very mellow. If you like, Bob Dylan and Neil Young and acoustic cowboy sorts of tunes, you won't be disappointed in this. And then just in closing, in terms of thinking about the work that he did with Dead and Company, the last tour they went back to Cornell, and this is where they reconfigured the band. Billy Kreutzmann, the usual drummer, left, but they brought Jay Lane from Rat Dog to man the kit. And I really think that the 2023 tour benefited a great deal. Not that Billy wasn't a great contributor to the Dead, but I think bringing in the Rat Dog element and having Jeff and Jay kind of leading that rhythm section kicked off things really nicely with the Cornell tour that carried him through 2023. I caught him for the last two shows at the Sphere, which was an amazing experience. And then we were fortunate. We did not know. I did not know. I don't think the Deadhead community knew that he had cancer. But they went out to San Francisco for Grateful Dead 60 and put on three shows. The first show really showed some sign of wear. I was surprised by how depleted he seemed. But then the next two nights, he seemed to pick things up, and totally expected him to return to a residency at the Sphere or do things with Don Was and Wolf Bros and just kind of continue. Maybe even do something with Rat Dog. He even hinted at an opera of all things. It's hard to believe that that Bob Weir was kind of contemplating some kind of opera. But in any case, not a figure that often gets mentioned on the Contrarians. And so comment section for Bob Weir.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Somehow I had missed that Bob Weir had died. I guess that's the thing about news feeds in today's world. I never
Right.
looked up information on the Grateful Dead, so it's not going to tell me that a member of the Dead has passed.
Right.
I had no idea that Billy Cobham played with them, and I'm a big Cobham fan. I'm a Miles Davis fan and Mahavishnu fan, so I'm gonna have to check that out.
It is a shocker.
Yeah.
Hey, jazz fusion drummers show up in the weirdest places, like Tony Williams playing on album for Public Image Limited.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't there one who played on Megadeth? What was his name?
Vinny Colaiuta.
Yeah, Vinny Colaiuta played on the Megadeth album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys, the jazz fusion drummers, they nail it. All right. Don't want to get too I don't want to start talking about drummers because I know so little about that. I'm like, I've already said everything I know about drummers. Move on. All right. So we're gonna go to Phil. Phil, what band do you want to talk about today?
All right. Okay, so let's take it from the beginning. In the late 80s, somewhere then in the late 80s, you have the formation of one of the most seminal, influential grindcore bands. Now, I'm not a fan of grindcore. I'm not going to talk about grindcore, but I'm going to segue from that. So you have the formation of the band Carcass, who are, they started as a grindcore band, and then they sort of morphed into this really very influential, revolutionary, almost melodic death metal band. Not in the like so much of the other Swedish bands of their compatriots like At the Gates or Dark Tranquillity and In Flames, but melodic, almost bluesy death metal bands. And then somewhere in '93, their lead guitar player and one of my favorite guitar heroes, he's a definitive guitar hero, Michael Amott from Sweden. He creates I think I could say they are my favorite stoner metal, stoner rock, more towards metal band, Spiritual Beggars. Raise your hand if you know Spiritual Beggars. Okay, cool. Right. So, Spiritual Beggars start in 1993 with their eponymous album, Spiritual Beggars. Then they release Another Way to Shine, which starts to show a lot of that sort of Masters of Reality, classic stoner influence. I mean, everything starts with Masters of Reality, more or less. I mean, we can all more or less agree on that. Saint Vitus also, they also kind of play a role in this. You can feel in the mix that there's a bit of Masters of Reality, Saint Vitus, and a lot of like vintage elements as well from the 70s, as is very common with the stoner genre. And then they start to really shape their own identity as a band, their own sound, with the first album, which I have in physical copy, Mantra 3. Already you can just see on that cover here. One second, let me move here a bit. You can see already on that cover, you have the same logo like with the Grateful Dead, right? It's all a little bit vintagey. There's a lot of vintage elements in this already. And I think that there's been a lot of talk about vintage in the last 10, 20 years. But already, if you look in the 90s with a band like this, who started making a bit of a splash at the same time as Monster Magnet, there's quite a few vintage elements that have to do also with the kind of psychedelic part, psychedelic elements that uh, are essential to what we call stoner rock, stoner metal. But it's very melodic, very bluesy, down-tuned guitars, very Sabbathy, very melodic, with an amazing vocalist who goes by the name Spice. He has this like really soulful, deep, masculine kind of voice with a bit of a bit grimy voice as well, but just really soulful, melodic voice. And then they release in the year 2000 what I think, and I think many think, is their definitive masterpiece called Ad Astra. I mean, just look at that cover. It screams sort of like, vintage 60s, I don't know, sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of vibe. This one has also a fantastic poster in it here with that same kind of like Monster Magnet kind of vibe as well that you get. I think that this album and Dopes to Infinity are my favorite stoner albums. Monster Magnet are more psychedelic, spacey. Um, these guys are more guitar oriented. Michael Amott is a definitive guitar hero. His favorite guitar player has always been Michael Schenker. You can hear that in how melodic his solos are, but he can shred. He can do some really like mind-blowing shredding and fast playing and alternating between blues and minor and major and all the guitar hero-y kind of stuff that you associate also with Van Halen. This album features on the bass guitar Charlie D'Angelo, who also played with Merciful Fate. Per Wiberg on the keyboards with that really loud, fat organ sound that fits perfectly with the stoner genre. Per Wiberg would later move on to play with Opeth, and I think he's found his footing in that band. Now I have to say that at the point more or less where Spiritual Beggars were starting to sort of take off, Michael Amott also forms another band, a death metal band, melodic death metal band known as Arch Enemy. Their first one, two, three, four albums, I think, are fantastic, very much in that kind of Swedish vein of death metal. And then after the release of this album, their singer leaves them. They release On Fire with the singer known as JB, who was singing for the other sort of traditional metal, stoner metal band, Grand Magus. Again, a very soulful, deep, very deep, masculine voice, that's very fitting for this genre. Fantastic stuff, more vintagey. You can start to hear a little bit of Uriah Heep as well, a bit of those kind of like proto-metal 70s bands. But at this point, Arch Enemy are really starting to take off with uh, their singer at this point is Angela Gosso, and Arch Enemy and Michael Amott will basically create this industry of female-fronted melodic death metal bands. Arch Enemy will become a very corporate band. I like to call it capitalist metal, just to fit in with what Alex was saying earlier about the political stuff. And gradually, Michael Amott's priorities start to rest more and more with the cash machine that is Arch Enemy. They're touring everywhere. They're playing big festivals, arenas. They're really taking off. And later on, when they recruit their next singer, who left them recently, I forget her name now. They become mega, like a huge name. So gradually, Spiritual Beggars start to get on the ice, as we say. Anyway, in the meantime, they release Demons, which is again like really soulful, bluesy, heavy, down-tuned stoner. Love it, absolutely love it. And then they get another singer again. JB leaves them. Grand Magus are starting to get a bit going to make a better career. And Spiritual Beggars becomes more vintage. You start to hear a lot of like Uli John Roth era Scorpions, much more Uriah Heep, very much more soulful bluesy stuff. And they recruit in the singer post Apollo Athanasio, who's my compatriot from Greece, who was singing at the time also for the heavy power metal band Firewind. He has a very David Coverdale voice that fits very much with the more sort of bluesy, soulful Hendrix, Scorpions, Uriah Heep kind of style that they had with this album, Return to Zero. Again, very sort of vintagey 70s kind of cover. And then they released in 2014 Earth Blues, which is even more vintage. And in 2016, they released what's it called? Sunrise to Sundown, which is a awful album. Awful. I listened to it a few times and I thought, okay, this is obviously the end of Spiritual Beggars 10 years ago because Arch Enemy have become the number one priority of Michael Amott. It's a cash machine. It's churning out a lot. They are very corporate and they are producing a lot of albums. They have a mega fan base, especially of youngsters who are, really turning on to their music. So unfortunately, Spiritual Beggars, I think are kaput. But I still listen to them and I think they are really like, alongside Monster Magnet, my favorite 90s stoner band. They also toured at some point with Fu Manchu, so they're also kind of in that vein. Anyway, I hope people get turned on to Spiritual Beggars. They're really great. And the best thing that Michael Amott ever did. Forget about Arch Enemy and all that corporate stuff. Yeah.
Okay, Spiritual Beggars. Man, them and Fu Manchu, that'd have been a concert I'd like to go to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Phil. Music to check out. If you see me typing as people talk, sometimes I'm going in and adding things to like a playlist so that I remember what we've talked about after the show is over.
That's the whole point. That's the whole
point. I go over and listen to stuff. All right, I'm going to go down to Parish of Rock. Parish, what band do you want to talk about today?
Okay, I've mentioned this band before on Contrarians, but I haven't really spoken about them, which is surprising because they're the band that got me into the music that I love, the rock bands that I like. And I was a kid of 6 when I first saw them appear on Top of the Pops. It's arguable whether this is a band or really an individual. It's this group, it's this person, it's T-Rex, and it's Mark Boland. So I was 6, I saw them do Hot Love on Top of the Pops. He had his glitter makeup on, the satin trousers, the corkscrew hairstyle, and it said that he invented glam rock on that episode. It's arguable whether it was actually him or David Bowie, but certainly if you look it up, most people cite Mark Boland as the influence for glam rock. And he certainly was a major influence on me because I think almost every music I like, every song I like, every band I like is a version of that kind of pop rock, guitar-orientated commercial music. So yeah, 55 years later, I'm still effectively liking the same music. And also, the other thing that was interesting, I mean, up until T-Rex, the only music I heard was the music my parents played, which for my father was sort of 50s rock and roll. For my mother, it was sort of soundtracks from musicals, or it's my elder brothers who were listening to either 60s or very early 70s sort of prog rock. So this was the first artist that I would say I felt was my artist, as opposed to listening to somebody else's music. Very much a singles band. Oh, sorry, I should stop and say T-Rex, not Tyrannosaurus Rex, which was the early band that Mark Boland had, which was an acoustic sort of, I suppose you'd call it folk band. But in 1970, he seemed to discover electric guitars, changed the style totally, and in the early 70s was a huge star in the UK, around most of Europe, I think also in Australia, but with the exception of one song, obviously never made it across the pond to America. But just to give a sort of a view on the singles, Rider What Not Right Swan was number 2, Hot Love was number 1, Get It On was number 1, Jeepster was number 2, Telegram Sam was number 1, Metal Guru was number 1, Children of the Revolution was number 1, Easy Action was number 2, 20th Century Boy was number 3, The Groover was number 4, and that was over a period of two and a half years. So you can see the number of hits he had, absolutely massive, seemed to be on the telly all the time. And then his last hit, which was in 76, was a song called I Love to Boogie. And certainly for me, it was the singles that I was into. So that was a greatest hits that came out in the early 80s, and is still one of my favourite albums of all time. Probably the best known and most classic of his albums is Electric Warrior, which I not only think is one of the best album titles ever, I also think it's one of the best album covers ever, with that look. This is a version that came out about 10 years ago for Record Store Day, with a sort of a sleeve that opens. I've always wondered what the full shot was. Was that a shot that was done in the studio? But it wasn't. It was actually a shot that was done live. And I think one of the things about Mark Boland that is really underestimated is I think he's a fantastic guitarist. So I mean, he always looked the pop star or the rock star. He had those looks, which is why in the early 70s T-Rex was big as the Beatles. I mean, the 60s you had Beatlemania. In the 70s, early 70s certainly, you had what they called T-Rex to see, which was kind of their version of Beatlemania, a huge pop star. But I think he was also a really good guitarist, and he's often overlooked as his skills as a guitarist. And the influence, I'm going to show this off. I got this for Christmas, so I'm going to show this off. This is all of the albums in a recent box set. So you've got The Slider, which is another big hit album, the one I've just shown, but it's got all of the albums, and it's the first time I've got the albums on CD. It took me quite a while to get into the albums. As I say, huge singles band, and a lot of the singles never appeared on albums, and I would say it was only really towards the late 80s that I really discovered the albums. I was always into the singles, but fantastic albums all the way through. The later music in the late 70s, well, sort of mid 70s, they moved from being glam rock to being more sort of, there was an element of soul and funk and disco in there, so they certainly transformed. The core band, and it did evolve, but the core band was Mark Boland, Mickey Finn on percussion. It's always odd to see somebody who's a main member of a band up front, at the front of the stage, playing bongos. You don't see many bands where you have a bongo player as a star. But they also had Steve Curry on bass, you had Bill Legend on drums, and then latterly the legendary Herbie Flowers played bass as well. So Herbie Flowers, who played on lots of songs and albums during the 70s. If you watch any of the clips on Top of the Pops, you'll see that there's a load of guest stars playing, like Elton John on one of the songs. You'll see Mick Ronson from Bowie on another one. So he seemed to be a friend to all the stars around that time. Tragically, we lost him at the age of 29. In 77, his star had fallen a bit, I would say, from about 75, as is often the case with pop stars. His sort of popularity dropped away, but In 77, he had a TV program called Mark, kids program, and he had all of the sort of up and coming new wave and punk bands on there, the Stranglers, people like that. So he was coming back to the fore. He released a couple of singles. At that time, here's one of them, You Scare Me to Death, which I really like. Came out in 77, soon before he died, or just before he died. And it's a shame, really, because I think if he hadn't have died in the car crash, the late 70s, he would have been as big as he was in the early 70s. I mean, his popularity really was gaining. And just, I would also say he's one of the most influential artists of all time. I just want to read out the vast number of bands and range of bands that quote Mark Bolander's T-Rex as influences. Bauhaus, Joy Division, The Smiths, Susie and the Banshees, New York Dolls, Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, Kate Bush, Gary Newman, Sparks, The Stooges, Sex Pistols, R.E.M., Jesus and Mary Chain, Killers, Muse, Manic Street Preachers, Oasis, Blur. So you can see not one style of music there, lots of different styles, all quote Mark Bolander's T-Rex as a major influence. So I would say one of the biggest influences from the early 70s. Not really remembered. I mean, he was absolutely huge in the 70s, and you do occasionally hear his songs on the radio, but you don't hear them as much as you would think when he was such a big star. And just to finish, if you want to go off and listen to Mark Boland, to me, his best songs are Metal Guru and Children of the Revolution. So if you really want to get a feel for Mark Boland, who changed my life in 1971, they would be the two songs I would listen to.
The songs have been covered by a lot of people as well. I think
they have, yeah.
Yes. He also did a movie called Born to Boogie, which I think is what that clip that you were talking about. It's got Elton John and all that in it as well. I think that's where that clip comes from.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say is in the mid '80s, I was in a covers band that played around the clubs and pubs in London, and we were called I Love to Boogie, which was a Mark Bolan song, and we did covers of Mark Bolan, but we also did ZZ Top, AC/DC, Status Quo. And because quite a few people would turn up thinking we were a disco band, we also did covers of Earth, Wind and Fire, Heatwave as well, just in case the wrong audience turned up. So we were a bit of a mixture. But yeah, I loved playing T-Rex songs. So great band.
All right.
So
Very good.
can I ask a follow-up question? Because I love all eras, and I think he was a genuine rock star, no question. I like that Tyrannosaurus Rex. I know it's kind of quirky and acoustic, and there's a charm to it for me. Do you still not like that stuff?
I listen. Look, it's Mark Bolan, so I don't dislike it, but it's not. I mean, I'm not particularly into folk music and that acoustic sound. So, I mean, I've got the albums. I do occasionally listen to them, but it's the electric T-Rex that I kind of turn to. But a different band, and certainly, I mean, what it was a fantastic songwriter. He was able to write some brilliant sort of catchy songs, and I suspect that a lot of the songs he did in the early 70s, if you heard them on acoustic, they would sound very different. So yeah, an excellent songwriter. So I don't dislike it, but certainly the band that I love is the Electric T-Rex, the Electric Warrior that is T-Rex.
All right, there you go. All right, thank you, Parrish. Loved it. Ashley, let's go down under. What band do you want to talk about today?
Okay, well, the band I'm going to talk about, I featured this band on Grants Rock Warehouse probably a few months ago, and we just recently interviewed their lead singer, and the band I want to talk about is Aussie band Taste. And Taste were formed back in 1970 under the name of Cloud 9, and basically what they were just a backing band going around backing other artists around our hotels and pubs around here in Australia. They did a lot of put a lot to a lot of well-known artists we had at the time, and then they decided to form their own band, and the band was called Cloud 9, and they did an album in '75 called "We're Just Friends, So Rock On." And unfortunately, I asked Ken. We interviewed Ken on Grants Rock Warehouse as well, And he's not very fond of the album. There's they were a band, and the producer that done their album was a bit of a country person, so it hasn't got the type of sound as you want. And they were around 14, 15 when they did that album. And then 76 they did their debut album called Tickle Your Fancy, which is that one there. And this is a very much in the glam rock type of sound, the heavy sound. So if you like bands like Queen and Sweet with a bit of AC/DC influences on there, please check this band out. They started, as I said, very good. They're a very young and all very talented band at the time. They were on our show Countdown. They had some top 10 hits as well. And the drummer in this band that started off was a guy by the name of Virgil Donati, who ended up being one of the famous drummers of all time. And he's absolutely fantastic. And
If I may, he even auditioned for the drummer post in Dream Theater.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, he's played with so many artists here in Australia, from the likes of Tina Arena. He was in Southern Suns, who are a bit of a poppy band as well, but playing a lot of obscure Australian acts as well. So he's done a bit of everything. And he had a good back. He also had a very good upbringing too from his father, as his father was a piano, a solo artist on his own. And he actually played his first live gig at the age of 4. So he's been around the tracks. So yeah. Their second album, Taste, released in 77, is called Nights of Love. And this is where the band started to develop their sound. And they were actually big fan. The Queen were a very big fan of this band. They spoke to their management about them, and their management wanted to sign them and take them over to the States and sign them up with Sire. However, a few little things happened along the way, and the band changed management, and that was more or less the end of that. So the band decided to call it quits in 78, and all went off in their own little directions here in Australia. Some forms of other bands. Joey mentioned the guitarist wanted to play with Moving Pictures and Wendy and the Rockets. And Ken had a band called, what's the band he was in? Called Texas, and they were a bit of a boogie rock type of, like a ZZ Top type of band. However, in 2007, the band decided to reunite, and they released this album called Rock is Dead. And this is, again, taking that glam rock image and more or less bringing it into a into a noughties type of sound, and really bringing the band a bit more to life, a lot more heavier than what they've done in the past. And also got lots of good harmonies on it too. This band were very well known for their harmonies, a bit like what Sweet used to do, and Queen as well, with all their members doing the harmony vocals. Really, really good. And this came out in 2007. Wasn't a big album here in Australia compared to the first two, but it was certainly had an underground following, and the band did tour around Australia at the time for this album. In 2015, they released, get it here, they released the album Life on Earth, which is that one there. And again, very much in the same as the Rock is Dead category, but again, this album has got a lot better production than Rock is Dead. I personally prefer Rock is Dead because I like the rawness of it. But again, we've still got the hard rock hard rock edge with the newer sound. And also got lots of little different times about it. There's a bit of jazz on this one as well. They tend to explore a little bit more than what they normally do. And what they've done for those two albums, the last two, Life on Earth and Rock is Dead, they released this album for the European market. And this one's called Rock is God. And this was for the European people, for the European market. And this is like a best of those two albums, which they only released over there. It was only a European only release, and it was for their market to see if the band could break into that market. And it did quite well for them. And that's so basically, if you've got the first, it's just basically a best of those last two albums. And then of course, the band did a little limited only fan release, and they released a best of Taste. And this is only for their members of the fan club members only. And this has got a few little outtakes on there. Because back in the day, in 75, these guys supported the Sweet and Susie Quattro when they came to Australia in 75 and 76. And you get a few little outtakes on there, some of their singles. They also did a lot of radio adverts as well. And they also do a good cover of Restless on there, the Sweet version. And then we had the COVID lockdown as we did, and the band released 2 albums at the time, and they're both called Brothers. And these are like basically little singles that they recorded like all in separate studios, but I also threw in some film clips for you guys to look at as well, which went on YouTube at the time. And their latest album is called Fighting Gravity, and this came out last year. And a little bit different for the band, this one though. It's still got the heaviness and the edge, but it's also got a lot of melodic rock on it as well, and a little bit more again, a bit of the jazz influence, and they sort of branch off into their own little pockets and stuff instead of just focusing on the hard rock. So yeah, and also, as I said, I featured them on Grants Rock Warehaus. They're all on Spotify if you want to check them out, and they're also on YouTube. There's plenty of stuff for them on YouTube. So Aussie band Taste, give them some love.
Okay, and still very contemporary, so that's awesome.
Yes.
They sound like a band I'd like, Ashley.
Yes, you would.
Yeah.
You would indeed.
I've just looked them up. You're definitely right. They're on Spotify, so that's my playlist for the weekend, I think.
Nah, you're
thanks,
into all that glam.
Thanks for that.
You like all the glam rock and the
I do,
and the tweets. You would love it. You would love it.
Okay, as I say, my playlist for the weekend. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashley. All right, and that just leaves me. So, I was planning on talking about the urban cowboy revival of the late 1970s, but then something happened. I'm totally kidding about that. I hate all forms of country music. I'm sorry. I'm not music agnostic. I don't like country music. Grew up listening to it, gave it up as soon as I had the chance. But something happened today that made me just on the spur of the moment decide to change who I was going to talk about. This is probably, maybe arguably the most well-known band that we're going to cover tonight, but I have some things to say. It's because today Megadeth released their 17th and apparently final studio album. And I want to talk a bit about this band. Now, Gen X, I'm Gen X. I was born in 1968. And that is really like the sweet spot for metal. And I used to really take umbrage when people would say heavy metal is different than metal, but I've kind of accepted that that's just the way people talk about it now, and that's going to be a thing. And we'll get back to that towards the end of this. But there were a lot of bands that kind of came up in real time at the perfect time. So Killing's My Business and Business is Good came out in 1985. And like a lot of the early California, what were not known as thrash at the time, but what became thrash bands, it was cheap and it sounded terrible. And I remember hearing the album for the first time and just thinking, this sounds horrible. It just doesn't sound like a professional product. But the guys could really play. To me, the weak link was the singer. Hated his vocals. I'm sure we'll be bringing that up too as we go through. But I've mentioned before, I was a huge MTV junkie. I lived in a small town in Montana. We did not even have a rock radio station. So if you listened to music, it was because somebody owned it or it was on MTV. And songs from Peace Sells was all over MTV. And I loved those singles. Wake Up Dead, Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? Megadeth had something that other bands didn't. It wasn't just that their lyrics seemed to have a little bit more on the ball. They had a kind of technical virtuosity, which was not the default for heavy metal bands in the 80s. It's kind of easy, things go in this direction, right? You start off with Eddie Van Halen being kind of like a jazz fusion player put into a rock context. Like he worshipped Alan Holdsworth, and he could play very much like Alan Holdsworth. But there weren't a lot of bands that were doing that. Now, Yngwie Malmsteen had already put out his first album. But that whole kind of Ritchie Blackmore derived neoclassical thing, very different. And then Megadeth come out, you've got Chris Poland on lead, and Dave Mustaine, who's very influenced by Michael Schenker and the new wave of British heavy metal. So they had a virtuosity to the instruments that you just didn't get in other heavy metal at the time. And that includes Dave's first band, Metallica. Now, Metallica are really good, but frankly, you go album by album, they were not, like as instrumentalists, they were not on the same level as Megadeth. Although I think James Hetfield was a better singer. So I was still kind of on the fence. And then they came out with So Far, So Good, So What? And this is an album that a lot of people didn't like for some reason. But I saw this, this was the first concert that I saw Megadeth in. They were actually touring with Dio. It was Sabotage opening, and then Megadeth and Dio talk about a triple bill. That was a fantastic show. And I still remember they had done a video and a single for Anarchy in the UK, which I still think is a dumbass choice for a song by Megadeth. Not that it's a bad song. Just
better than Superstitious.
Well, yeah, kind of. But
better than These Boots.
Yes. Now that one I'll agree with. I actually kind of like their cover of Superstitious. I can't help it. But Anarchy in the UK had just hit the top 40. And I remember seeing these guys in concert, and they were up there playing, and Dave Mustaine says, "All right, we're supposed to get off the stage now, but my song just went top 40, so I'm doing an encore." And he played more songs. And I was like, "Ooh, man, I wonder how that's going to go over after the concert." I have no idea. Maybe Ronnie was fine with it, but pretty arrogant, which there's a theme we can get to over and over again with old Dave Mustaine. If you think about what is the definition of a rock star? How is a musician different from a rock star? Musicians play music. Rock stars are celebrities. And they're celebrities because of their personalities. And it's the guys that are the biggest jerks that often become like the most well-known. Think about Noel Gallagher. Why was Noel Gallagher constantly in the media? It's because all you had to do was stick a microphone in front of Noel's face and ask him his opinion on anything, and he would say the most outrageous crap about just about everybody. Is that admirable? No, but it makes great headlines. And Dave Mustaine has been like that since the 80s. He was not afraid to bag on Metallica and pretty much everybody else that he ever came across. And that kept him like in the forefront. Dave Mustaine was always there, right? And behind that, he had a band that really had the goods. When they came out with Rust in Peace, and now he says he didn't come up with this line, but I remember going to the record store and it having the big poster that said the world's state-of-the-art speed metal band. And now he's like, "Oh, that was so cheesy." I'm like, "No, that was genius. Whoever came up with that line, that was genius." And saw this concert. Actually, I saw every album's concert following So Far, So Good, So What? I saw a whole lot of Megadeth concerts. Then in the early 90s, thrash, there are still thrash bands, but the early thrash bands aren't really doing thrash anymore. They're just doing heavy metal. Metallica has come out with Metallica, which we all have to call the Black Album because that's what you do with self-titled albums. We'll probably be calling Megadeth's self-titled album the White Album eventually. And they came out with Countdown to Extinction. Now, this wasn't too long after the Black Album, and it is Megadeth's best-selling album. It's double platinum, which for a heavy metal band that wasn't a hair metal band is huge. And it really, right up until now, Megadeth were slugging it out with Metallica to be like the best, the most successful thrash band. And then, of course, Metallica took off like a rocket, and nobody was ever going to match that. And Megadeth started going commercially downhill. B-sides, I love some of their B-sides. They had a song called Go to Hell on the soundtrack to Bill and Ted's, the second Bill and Ted's movie. Now I can't remember what it's called.
Bogus Journey.
Yes, that's the one, Bogus Journey. And then they come out with Euthanasia, and it is, who was talking about corporate? That was you, Phil. This is a very corporate metal album. And at this point, I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm not into it as much. They got some good songs, but it wasn't as good. I remember this was the biggest show I ever saw of theirs. They played in arena, unlike, they were just playing little halls before, but on this one, they had the full arena with Corrosion of Conformity opening. Another great concert. Then things start going downhill. We get Cryptic Writings. Every album that you can name is somebody's favorite album. That's a thing. I know that there are people out there that love this album. I do not. I don't hate it, but I never listened to it. But it does have the distinction of being better than Risk, which is easily Megadeth's worst album.
Easy.
Come on, Super Collider is worse.
Yep.
No, I love no. I won't take that. Super Collider's got some really cool songs on it. Risk does not. And I said, I remember at the time Dave Mustaine giving interviews and saying that you had your choice of being heavy metal or more heavy metal hard rock, and he was leaning more towards hard rock like Fleetwood Mac.
Well, apparently, I heard a story where Lars Ulrich told him that he needs to start taking more risks in his songwriting, and that's why he called the album Risk.
And Dave now, he's like, if we hadn't put Megadeth on the cover, people would have loved that album. No, they wouldn't.
I think his daughter also may have had a role to play in some of the music that she was listening to. At least I heard something about his daughter having an influence on the music direction. I don't know.
It's quite possible, but when you're putting out your, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And when you're putting out your 8th album, suddenly choosing a new musical identity is not really an option. So they go away for a while. We have the whole, no, that comes a little later. They come out with The World Needs a Hero, the one album with Al Pitrelli on guitar. Al Pitrelli's an amazing guitar player. And this came out not too long after 9/11/2001. I remember seeing this, I was on work detail up in Chicago, actually drove up to some other place in Illinois to see them with Iced Earth opening for them, and everybody was making comments about 9/11. It's not their worst album, because that's Risk, but it's not wonderful.
No.
And then Dave apparently gets a nerve injury, says he's sitting on the back of a chair, has his arm hanging over it, pinches off a nerve in his arm, and he doesn't know if he's ever going to play guitar again. They re-release all of the Megadeth albums. Just go through, remaster them, re-release them. I don't think any of the remasters are an improvement. I mean, in 100% of the time, I think the original albums are just better. The things that they chose to cut back in the day, there was a reason. Sometimes the producer actually does know best. Not always, but sometimes they do. That's why you pay them the money to do it. And he comes out with The System Has Failed. I saw this concert too. And The System Has Failed is pretty good. They bring Chris Poland back. You can tell there's some tension, but the songwriting improves. And this is when we suddenly start the Megadeth sine wave, because now his career is going to do this. It's going to get better. It's going to go down. It's going to get better. It's going to go down. And he pretty much rides that out. I'm just going to fast forward to the point here. They've gone, I should have looked up how many people have been in this band. It's a lot. It's not quite as many as Black Sabbath, but it's a lot of people that have gone through this band. Something like 19 or 20 different musicians have been a part of Megadeth. I mean, Dave Mustaine is the only original member left. And I think we get some really interesting things out of this. And I wish Martin Popoff were on this panel, because Martin has this thing about how singer equals band. And especially when the singer is the songwriter. But even if you have someone else writing the music, as long as your singer's the same, you often stay the same band. And I think Megadeth are kind of an illustration of that. Now, obviously, Dave's a guitar player, but he's writing songs, he's writing the lyrics, he's the singer, and you can constantly swap out everybody around him, and you still more or less end up with Megadeth. I mean, even this last one, so he's brought in Kiko Loureiro. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Kiko. I have no experience with Brazilian names. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. He's a virtuoso. You can listen to Kiko's. He's done some jazz fusion instrumental albums like Al Di Meola. I'm not a huge fan of Angra, his former band, but an amazing guitar player. But I don't really think he was a massive step up for Megadeth. I mean, Megadeth had already set the bar so high so often that he just fits in. But then when he leaves, he brings in this completely unknown guy. I think he's was a student of Kiko's in Finland. And he's like, here's this guy, Timu Montasari. I also don't know how to pronounce Finnish names.
That's how it's pronounced. He had the band called Winter Sun.
Oh, okay. But certainly not a band that many people who aren't heavy into the scene had ever heard of. So it's like, hey, here's this guy that they pull out of nowhere, and here you play in Megadeth. And yeah, he absolutely fits right in. So as long as Dave is there, you still have Megadeth. So I'm just going to have two more points. One, a couple of years ago now, I don't remember what the exact date was, but Megadeth was doing a show at Budokan. And the big selling point of the show was they had Marty Friedman back on. So Marty's been living in Japan for a couple of decades at this point. But they bring Marty on. It was like a pay-per-view. And I wasn't going to watch it. And I was like, dude, Megadeth's one of your favorite bands of all time. Just watch the damn show. So I rented it and I watched it. And my one takeaway from watching it was, oh man, Dave can't play and sing anymore. His voice is shot and his fingers are way slower than they used to be.
He has arthritis.
Yeah. Now, no shade. Dude, I'm 57 years old. I am nowhere near what I was in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s. You know, Dave's 8 years older than I am. So, again, no shade on getting older, but these things do happen. So that show was really disheartening for me because I was like, oh, I think it's time for these guys to pack it up. I think Dave must agree, at least on some level, because now he's like, we're doing our last album. I'm sure the album, I have not had a chance to hear the album. I've heard some of the advanced singles. I'm sure it's fantastic. But I watched a video for Let There Be Shred. A couple of points. I think it's hilarious that Dave is constantly pushing his Gibson guitar's headstock at the camera. But you go over to Timu, they never show the headstock on his guitar. Like, marketing! Two, when they get to Dave Mustaine's solo at the end of that song, I'm like, this is, if I had played that solo, I'd be happy. But for Dave Mustaine to play that solo, no, it's time. It's time to, as Martin says, to knock this on its head. And I think they're doing that. Sadly, as many times as I've seen Megadeth live, I've seen 14 Megadeth shows. I mean, a lot. I have zero urge to go out and see them on the new tour. I want to live with my memories, not go out thinking, oof, man, it's time for this guy to call it in. But I want to give Dave massive props before I sign this off, because I don't want to be like, sound like I'm all negative about Megadeth. They produced some of my favorite heavy metal of all time. They produced some of my favorite guitar players of all time have gone through Megadeth. They have some absolutely amazing songs. I wish he'd give up cover songs. Dave does not have good taste in doing covers that fit the band. But nonetheless, Dave is absolutely one of the biggest riff masters of all time. And he's written some fantastic music. But I want to give him one bigger prop. And I saw a show where on Sea of Tranquility, Martin and
Pete.
Yeah, and Pete. Sorry about that. We're talking about who invented metal. And Martin makes the argument cogently, because it's Martin, that Metallica invent metal with Kill 'Em All. I'm going to go one step further. If you listen to Ride the Lightning is not the same album as Kill 'Em All. I mean, obviously, because the guy who wrote most of the music for Kill 'Em All is gone. So they've brought in Kirk Hammett. No shade on Kirk Hammett. I'm not a Kirk Hammett hater. I like Metallica. But the music that they produce with Kirk Hammett's very different. And then they come out with Master of Puppets, and now there aren't even elements that I would call thrash anymore. But you listen to Killing's My Business and Business is Good, it's the same as Kill 'Em All. A little better, a little faster, a lot more aggressive, a lot dirtier. You listen to Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? It's the same style of music as Kill 'Em All. So my final point, feel free to throw some hate in the comments. My final point, if Kill 'Em All is the first metal album, then Dave Mustaine invented metal.
Reed, I'm kind of curious. What did you make of Chris Poland's Megalopolis album?
I love it. It has some absolutely fantastic. I also liked Ohm. If you like jazz fusion, I've actually seen those guys live. They're excellent. Chris Poland's kind of he's got this thing where he's got a finger that sticks out at this weird angle because he broke it when he was young. So he can get these incredible stretches on the fretboard, which is why he plays like he does. But that was back when I listened to more instrumental music. I never listen to instrumental music anymore. I have to have a singer or I just can't get into it. But Return to Metalopolis is really good. And he's got another solo album, the name of which is escaping me, that has some really good tracks on it.
Reed, can I just say, since you brought up Megadeth, my man Oliver has a new show on YouTube called Rock Kaput, Kaput, and he is going to have a review of the new album and a ranking show coming up.
With you. And you're on it.
Yours truly.
All right.
And you came up accidentally with a great title for a rage baiting video about Megadeth called Negative About Megadeth. That sounds great.
Yeah.
But you see, Dave Mustaine, he doesn't care. And that's why he has a song on the last album called I Don't Care, and it kicks ass.
Yeah. He can still write. He absolutely can still write. And I've got no doubt that in a studio environment, he still sounds fantastic.
And you know what? He cannot really sing so much anymore, but he can snarl. And I love his snarling.
But I don't think that when Dave Mustaine says I don't care, I don't believe a word what he's saying, because he cares a lot about what people think about him and say about him.
He does take things seriously because he has a chip on his shoulder.
Just one more anecdote. I used to live in Oklahoma City, and Megadeth had come through. They were doing promotion at the radio station, and he had pissed off the DJs at the radio station. So they played all of this like anti-Megadeth propaganda. But my absolute favorite is they're talking to him, and Dave goes on this rant about people that are too stupid to remember their lyrics. And he's like, "What? Are you smoking so many drugs that you can't even remember the lyrics that you wrote?" And then in the same interview, he's like, "But nobody's really listening to the lyrics. So if I'm on stage and I forget what I'm singing, I just do the Elvis thing and go, hey," and then they would just play like, he would loop it where it says, "What, are you so stupid you can't remember your own lyrics?" And then when I forget my lyrics, I just do this. So
he contains multitudes.
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. And you know what? I will check out your Megadeth ranking and review that. That sounds like fun. Give me the name of that. Rock Kaput?
Yeah, Rock Kaput. Yes, two Germans talking about rock and metal. We thought we have to get some Denglish, which is like German and English. We call it Denglish when people mix up Deutsch with English. Right. So we thought we wanted to do it in English, and we had to get something German into the title. So we call it Rock Kaput.
Okay.
Beautiful. Great channel. Check it out, guys. It's a great channel.
All right, there you go. Don't mind throwing a little publicity around. It's all family. Speaking of which, I'm under contractual obligation to mention that we have a Patreon. Joining the Patreon to get you on these panels. And feel free to like and subscribe to videos. Thank you for spending a little time with us. There is nothing that we like more than talking about the music that we love. Guys, I love talking about music with you. This has been a great panel. I hope that people enjoy watching it, and we will see everyone real soon on the Contrarians.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.